Ladies and gents, our next guest speaker is Dr. Tom Lewis OAM. He received his OAM for his years of dedication to naval history. Tom is also a very well-published author, as we can see here, and he tells me that during the Iraq War, he worked in Iraq as an intelligence analyst, but actually commanded a US intelligence division with a few Japanese intelligence analysts as well. So today he's come out from the shadows. He's come out from behind the green door to hopefully enlighten us today, and his topic is the Secret Submarine, how the RAAF sunk the Japanese 178 off Sydney. Please welcome Tom.
So yes, I've been busy. This is a talk that I do on cruise liners. Well, I do lots of talks on cruise liners at the moment, and this one's been presented twice, and I cut it down a bit. So there's probably a few slides here unnecessary for an expert audience as yourself, so I'll probably go quite fast over those. So the Japanese Empire's at war, as you know, they're very successful. Over in Europe, war is raging, and our troops are over there because that's the centre of gravity. It makes sense to go over there and fight them while you can. And as we have found out this morning, war's already reached Australia's shores, and it's done a very good job. The fight between Sydney and Cormoran, for example, the largest loss of life we've actually had in a naval warship in our history, 645 men. Spent quite a bit of time researching that for a book called The Sinking of HMAS Sydney. And then the war spreads, as you know, into the Pacific with the attack on Hawaii. And lo and behold, the first attacks on Australia, apart from the German attacks, of course, and the mine warfare, the first Japanese attacks we have is submarine warfare, and it's off Darwin. And the submarine that was sunk is still there today. And coincidentally, I was cruising over the top of it 2 weeks ago on a cruise liner, and we're going into town. I'm doing a talk on the submarine, which is still there below us with its 80 men on board. Rather tragic for them, but a success for us, and I wrote a book on that about 25 years ago. So what was that all about? It was about laying mines. It was about sealing up Darwin as a port. So if you lay the mines and we run into them, then that brings the port to a standstill. Those ships that do manage to navigate through the minefields, you lie in wait in the killing fields for those and you torpedo them. This is actually a chart from the Japanese Navy, which I went all the way to Tokyo and found some years ago. And lo and behold, it shows one of the submarines, the I-122, going off to the Torres Strait. There she is, and she came back. So she laid mines, about 30 from each submarine, off the Torres Strait. And as our previous speaker told us, a lot of this mine warfare is unsuccessful. Not one of the 120 mines that these 4 submarines laid sank anything at all. And the main reason is the enormous tides that you get in Darwin and Broome. They sweep the mines away and they end up on beaches and they get blown up with rifle fire and so on. So very happily, hopefully none of them are out there at all today. The 4 submarines, when the I-22 came back, and coincidentally, she was commanded by the CO of the submarine that was sunk off Sydney that I'm discussing. So there's an odd thing that I found when I came through the records. They lay in wait for convoys going in and out, and they had a go. These are enormous fleet boats. They're about double the length of a swimming pool, an Olympic swimming pool. So an enormous length, a very big boat. And you get an idea. This is a very foreshortened image, but there's the forward gun at the other end there. They're a very big boat indeed. This took on the corvette HMAS Deloraine in the afternoon of the 20th of January 1942, and again it was a total failure. Corvettes were specifically designed to sink submarines. This particular corvette, under the command of the strangely named Lieutenant Commander Desmond Menlove, had done a great job of working up her teamwork, and she took the submarine on in a short, sharp action. She was sent to the bottom. We put divers onto it in the 2 weeks afterwards to try and get code books out, but we didn't manage to do that. And then, of course, the Japanese aircraft carriers to complete the job, which was to shut down the port of Darwin. That's a sonar image from 3 years ago. The submarine is still in good condition, still with her 80 people inside, and Russ Crane, who was one of the chiefs of Navy, dived on it himself in the 1980s, so I was able to interview him for the book I did some time ago, and we occasionally get together and have a chat about it. Then you've got the massive first air raid on Darwin. So I'm sketching the background as to why these submarines are off the east coast after all. So what you couldn't do with submarines, they start to do with aircraft carriers. And these are 4 of the carriers out of the 6 that have struck Pearl Harbor. And they cross the coast to the east of Darwin and attack from the south. Really good idea with the sun behind you, 1 bomb run over the target, and they did a really great job. 188 aircraft sunk, 11 ships, 236 fatalities on the day. So I spent quite a bit of time in those books there researching this. Very interesting air raid. It's the biggest assault we've ever had on Australia in terms of aircraft. It's the first of 208 combined assaults across Australia using nearly 2,000 aircraft. But my topic today, of course, is submarines. Great photo, and actually I'm doing a talk this afternoon which will come back to this. Stop working?
Try it again.
I'll just do.
I have to keep trying it because it seems to work.
I can use the computer if you like. Right, do that. So combat keeps going until mid-1944. The last Japanese aircraft shot down was in June 1944, and the last aircraft over Northern Australia was in August. So there's the extent of the air raids. You can see it's fairly massive. Northern Australia's got a lot of these wrecks scattered through the bush and in the sea, which they haven't been found. And of course, it's matched by Allied aircraft because they go down in combat and also in accidents and so on. So it's a very big area of fairly unexplored air warfare. You then get the Battle of the Coral Sea. So, as we've already heard this morning, the Japanese are looking at dominating the eastern approach to Australia. Why do they want to do that? After Coral Sea failed, they still tried to take the eastern part of New Guinea. And the reason they want to do that is this. If you fight the war from the USA's point of view, from the Californian coast, you are going to lose. It's just too far, and there are no nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in those days that can stay on station forever. So the eventual plan is to use 3 great sweeps, one from Nimitz across the Pacific, one from MacArthur through Australia, and General Slim from Burma, which never really eventuated because it got very bogged down against a very good Japanese army. But you can see the distances there. If you fight it this way, you've got a chance of winning. So the Japanese planners, having access to exactly the same maps and having a fair degree of capable thinking, start to look at this and say, if this happens, we are going to lose. Therefore, take New Guinea, dominate the eastern approach to Australia, stop the Americans using it as a base, we stand a much better chance. And that is the reason behind Australia's coastal submarine war. And there's some of the stats that I've been busy researching over the last couple of years. Now, some of these are new, and basically what I've done is gone back into the US, Australian and Japanese records and worked out what actually happened as opposed to what people think happened, which is always a good approach, I think. There's actually one of the first maps which was made after the war. The Merchant Mariners Guild were rather upset that the war hadn't really encompassed them, and in the 1950s this was one of the maps they produced, rather oddly. Although Herman Gill, when he did his history of the Navy, did a pretty good job, I think. But it's largely unrecognised in Australia. I won't cover the midget submarine raid because we have an excellent talk coming up this afternoon, but it's part of the same concept, that you use submarines to dominate Australia. And it was a complete shambles. I wrote a book on it called attack on Sydney Harbour, and I think it's a fairly disgraceful part of Australia's military history. Made doubly so by the fact that the very brave small ship commanders who sank 2 of those submarines actually got nothing. They were never given any sort of recognition whatsoever, even to this day. Anyway, I'll skip over that. But it's part of this concept of coming down the coast and dominating a place and seeing what you can attack. And it's fairly interesting that we had Japanese aircraft flying over Hobart, for example, and Melbourne, and not once in 1942, not once were they fired at. 1943 they came back once and they were attacked this time but were not brought down. This is despite the fact that the Japanese aircraft flew with their Hinamaru, that big red circle, on it. They were clearly identified by a couple of people as Japanese, yet nobody opened fire. This is fairly normal in my experience in warfare. People don't believe that you can actually open fire. You sure I can, sir? Etc., etc. And then they do. Later on in the war, of course, people get a lot more savage and a lot more lethal. And one of the midget submarines, of course, is in the Australian War Memorial today, or it will be, back when it's fixed up again and the new back of the memorial opens up. So as we heard, we had gun attacks on Sydney and Newcastle. At least 4 Scratchley opened up and fired at the Japanese submarine. So that were really the only people to get it right in 1942. Rather odd. And then the submarine that was recovered was made into 2 submarines, were made into one that went on tour in the southern states of Australia. So then the I-class boats, it's an inaccurate name, but the big fleet boats start coming to Australia in quantity. So they started in Darwin. They do various attacks, small ones around Australia, and I sweep that up in another book I've got coming out later this year called Australia's Coastal War. But in the main, they start then coming down the east coast in quantity. And here's a quick sweep through some of those attacks. So off Queensland, you can see there. And this is the one that I'm concerned with, the I-178. So I tend to write 2 sorts of history books. Write books basically that like to overturn a myth or present something new. So this particular book basically presents something new. But overturning a myth is something that I wrote about in my Darwin books, in the attack on Sydney Harbour, for example, and a new book has just come out, The Sinking of HMAS Sydney. Can you try and find a new angle? And the one in the Sydney book, for example, was what is it like to live in a World War II cruiser and to fight and to die, as opposed to the actual final combat action of Sydney versus Cleveland. So this is again what I tried to do in this book, something new and a little bit of myth overturning, because we did indeed take on more submarines than you think. This particular submarine came down in 2 combat actions. In the first one, she sunk this particular ship here, Lydia M. Child, which is one of the famous Liberty ships, produced in quantity and a production line sort of basis by the United States. And she's basically hit early on in 1943. So this particular submarine comes down once and does a patrol, various attacks, and then she goes away and refuels the truck, and then she comes back again. And here she is. Now that's actually the I-176, as you can see, because I could not find a picture of I-178. So if you've got one, please come and see me. But they all tend to look exactly the same in this particular class, of course. And you can see there some of the interesting stats. But one of the great things about these Japanese submarines in World War II, which I think a lot of people don't understand, is the range and the endurance they've got. They've got tremendous range. They can go tremendous distance without refuelling. They can stay on station for months. So very great design work had gone into them, and they can range independent, and that means they can stay on station and menace you for a long time, which is, I suppose, one of the reasons why we're interested in nucleus today. Go to sea and stay there. From a propaganda film, and that's why the Submariner there looks rather clean. Carried a deck gun. The deck gun's basically there in World War II boats, so you can surface and sink a freighter that you might have caught without using one of your precious and expensive torpedoes, because you only have a certain amount, and once you run out, you have to go back to base. There's no fleet submarines from Japan left in the world today, by the way, that aren't sunk, that is. You can't go inside one. Lots of midget submarines. And a rather great colorised photograph. So as we heard this morning, you have two main periods of submarine activity off the eastern coast. Now, the book that I'm putting out later this year does sweep up things like odd attacks off Western Australia, the Northern Territory attacks, the German U-boat that we heard about this morning, ranging around the south and so on. But in the main, the Japanese come down for these two main waves. So in the book, what I was trying to do is sweep up the whole story of what it's like to be in submarines in World War II for a naive audience. So if you're ex-Navy, you might not want to read it. Because I tend to write these sort of books for my wife. She thinks submarines are big black things that go under the water, and that's about it. She'd been in one very rarely, and she didn't like it when she was. So what I'm trying to do for naive readers is bring to life what it's like to serve in a World War II submarine. And also, what it's like to serve in a World War II bomber. So oddly, this is not really just a Navy story, it's Air Force as well. What's it like to fly and fight in a World War II bomber? And I must pay tribute there to Brian Winspear, who died last week. Old friend of mine, aged 104, died in Hobart, and that's the front page of the Mercury last week, and I wrote his obituary. And actually, chapter 6 sweeps up his story, because I've known Brian for a long time. And so he was one of the bomber aircrew that I had that I could write about from a first-hand perspective. So the rest of the book then, after you sketch the background as to why submarines were here in World War II in the first place, it then goes to some detail as to what it's like to serve in submarines, horrible, and what it's like to serve in bombers, horrible, because unpressurised, unheated, who knew, who thinks about these things today? And then, why indeed did this submarine end up where she did? And that's where I think she is at the moment. So she was sunk in June 1943 when she came back on her second patrol, and she's somewhere between Coffs Harbour, or basically Newcastle probably, and Truck Lagoon. Because when she went down for the last time, that's where she was going back to. That's where you go to, if you can. So what did the final story look like? It's taken on by a Beaufort, and Beaufort dropped depth charges on it. Twin-engine light bomber, very capable. Australia had hundreds of them in World War II. Single pilot rather than dual pilots. 3-man crew most of the time. And the crew basically consists of a pilot, a bombardier, navigator, wireless operator, gunner, etc. And the gunners are people who basically keep bombers safe. Have you spotted the fighter aircraft attacking you in your position as bomber yet? No? He's there? Yep, there he is. Okay, he's coming at you upside down at 300 miles an hour. So you need to keep your wits about you in World War II to survive. It's a pretty dangerous occupation. Not to say that being in a submarine is not dangerous. The whole point of attacking them from aircraft is you can see them in good conditions underwater, not all the time, and it needs to be good conditions in daytime, but you also, over time in World War II, are perfecting the means of finding them and killing them. At the beginning of World War II, attacks in the Atlantic were resulting in a kill rate of 1%, a damage rate of 2%. At the end of the war, it's 48%. Okay? So at the beginning of the war, we're pretty hopeless. That's how wars go, and we're getting better and better. We discover things like you need to attack low and fast. So how to attack a submarine? Simple things like, don't attack across the submarine, attack up the length of the submarine. You've got a much better chance that way. But who knew? Bomber crews weren't doing that at the beginning of World War II. Was the explosive that was being used very good? No, it wasn't. And so therefore you start developing much better alternatives. At the same time, the submarines are aware they're being attacked by aircraft, and they're developing defences as well. So AA guns in World War II. And this is the famous Torpex depth charge that does the job. It's basically about 60% more powerful than the depth charges which were originally started the war with. And this is what the RAAF got in 1942-43, and this is what killed the submarine. So here's how it went off that coast of New South Wales in 1943. It's a night attack. Now here's a funny thing. I interviewed quite a few people. I knew, Brian's gone now, but I knew quite a lot of people in the RAAF in World War II, and for the life of me, none of them knew what colour illumination charges were fired at night. So very odd. Brian said, I never fired one in my life, why would I know? But this was a night attack. We think they're probably white, but we're not sure. Anyway, forgive the graphic. So this particular machine finds a submarine on the surface off New South Wales at night. He's recharging his batteries. Yeah? And you think we got lucky. That's what submarines do in World War II. They surface at night because that's when you hopefully won't be found. You run your diesels to recharge your batteries, you submerge, and you attack during the daytime hours if you have to, when submerged. So this particular machine, this particular submarine was surprised on the surface. Okay, he's got unlucky and he's attacked with 3 depth charges, but he doesn't submerge. That's odd. And then next, the submarine stays on the surface and another machine comes in, rather like tag team wrestling. These machines only carry 3 depth charges, so you launch your 3, the next one comes in, he takes over, he fires an illumination charge, he starts circling and attacking, the first one goes home because he's out of depth charges. Yeah, so the combat action goes on for quite a while. The second time, the submarine defends itself with anti-aircraft fire. And to make the action much more interesting, the bomber starts attacking with his machine guns. Probably both of them missed. It's very, very difficult. I did go into somewhat boring detail in the book how accurate is things like anti-aircraft fire between aircraft and submarine in World War II. And the answer is not very much. And the third submarine then comes out and he finds nothing. Submarine gone. So in the RAAF's history, the official history of World War II, it's there as an action with some discrepancies that I think I've corrected, but they don't claim it as a kill because they don't know. They don't know for sure. What happens, of course, is if you go to Japan and look at the surface, look at the records and find the records, it never came back. It was deployed off New South Wales, it never returned to Truck Lagoon. So, a number of questions, and I finished off the book with. Who knew that it takes 22 different actions to get a submarine to dive in World War II? A Collins class is up over 100 these days before it dives. There's 100 things that have to be green before it dives. Dive in World War II, you can usually get an American submarine down in 30 seconds. And that's to almost fully submerge, so the periscope is gone. Okay, that's when they're worked up and really good. Japanese, about the same. Don't know, was it surprised? Because none of the crew survived, and that's as much as we know. But it's surprising that it didn't dive. If you see an aircraft coming and you hear an aircraft coming, you would dive. Now, of course, the crew could have just made mistakes, but they're experienced. And the commander had been in the Navy for a long time. In fact, he commanded one of the submarines off Darwin. So, very strange. We don't really know. I'd say there's something mechanical that went wrong. It couldn't dive. And so they just had a go. They just defended themselves as best as they could. And they really just got unlucky. And so I did do some rumination in the book, but that's just me, blue. The aircrew were basically decorated. Harrison got a medal, and they went on to successful action. Their bomber has got a new name, Subconscious, very funny. Here's an odd thing, looking through the records as to what happened to those aircrew in the rest of the war, I came across a rather odd thing. So there's the 2 pilots. Now, before I get to that, this submarine was blamed for the loss of the Centaur, and it's not true. It looks like it's I-177, as was made beforehand. So for a time though, you'll find I-178's name associated with the sinking of the Centaur. Doesn't look like that's the case. It was this bloke here, and he never actually was charged with the sinking of the Centaur, because it was afterwards, a long time later, that it was found that he was the man. So here's the tragic finale. 3 of those crew members out of 6 were together in one bomber later in the war, and that bomber never came back. So it is an odd thing. So 6 crew members in those 2 successful bombers, 2 times 3, they're together in this bomber here, and they never come home. Harrison was a great performer on the accordion. Not sure if that's a good thing or not, but his accordion has survived, and it's in the Australian War Memorial today, so good on him. There's the Japanese record showing it never came home. And people always say, where's the submarine now? Well, the southern current does take you south. It's called a southern current for a reason. So it could have done a little bit south before it goes down. We don't know whether she's under power, whether she's sunk in a straight line, straight to the seabed, whether she was crippled and she did manage to submerge and then started creeping home. So somewhere along that line, maybe that submarine. That's a road I think we won't go down, because unless somebody finds it by accident, it's deep water there, and there's no real reason to go looking for it, as there was, for example, with the wreck of the Centaur. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. Yes, questions?
How would you describe the Japanese equivalent to the Goko class for the American workforce?
Good. Japanese submarines in World War II were, in my opinion, excellent. They advanced with their technology really quickly. For example, they started the war with that excellent oxygen-powered torpedo, erroneously called the Long Lance, which it wasn't, but it was the fastest torpedo in the world. Their submarines were very, very good, but they did have a couple of problems. One is they didn't pay a lot of attention to crew habitability. The crew were basically expected to suffer, and they did, of course, being sturdy Japanese types in World War II. The other thing that Japanese submarines did in World War II, which was really odd, was they attacked warships. Don't attack warships in World War II, or any time if you're a submariner. Kill the troop ships and the freighters and the oil tankers, okay? That is what will cripple the enemy. But why take on a corvette like HMAS Deloraine, specifically designed with crew trained to kill you? Because they will, and that's what happened to the I-124 off Darwin. It's a strange world, Japanese submarines. So,
how many other Japanese submarines were sunk by Australian aircraft on the east coast?
None. That's not to say that the RAAF and the Navy weren't doing sturdy and sterling work, as were the gunners on shore. Without deterrent, things would have been a lot worse. So keeping the enemy down, if you have got RAAF aircraft patrols flying over the top of him, and you've got ships vectored in to kill him, that's going to keep his attacks at a minimum. Without the RAAF and the Navy and the coastal gunners and so on in World War II, we would have had absolute carnage on the east coast.
Yeah. Would it be possible? I was researching a group of people, and one of them, there was an article in a paper saying that man in the bed of a plane just sunk a Japanese sub, but it was not the 178. Mm-hmm. So I've always wondered, were there other ones which were?
Oh yes, yeah.
Which were sunk?
In fact, in that book, and in the one I've got coming out at the end of the year, I've got lots and lots of attacks on Japanese submarines. Yeah. But if you go to Japan and look at the Japanese records, you can see they weren't successful. Yeah. We might have claimed them as a kill, but it didn't really happen. There's a submarine called RAAF, which was sunk between Townsville and Port Moresby by HMAS Arunta. That's a kill. But apart from that, the Darwin submarine and the midget submarines, that's about it. They all got home.
Okay, so it's false speaking.
Yeah. So,
the boat that you mentioned, where were they operating from?
Coffs Harbour.
Coffs Harbour.
Yeah, they had a new RAAF base there, which rapidly got a lot bigger. In fact, if you land at Coffs Harbour today, that's the airstrip.
Right.
Right.
Oh, I'm wondering about the merchant navy, the number of ships that were actually sunk. What protection did they have? They would have had DEMS gunners on.
They did have DEMS gunners, for those who haven't heard, defensively equipped maritime ships, merchant ships.
As well. Sorry, I know I'm interrupting you, but wouldn't they also have depth charges?
No.
Because that's how they tackled it in the Atlantic convoys.
It's not a bad idea having a depth charge on a merchant ship, because if you roll it off and it goes bang, the submarine tends to hide. But you need sonar to know where to go. And so, yeah, generally you haven't got a lot of defence apart from the convoy escort and the DEMS gunners, very brave chaps who man guns on board merchant ships. And in the end, what you find in the Atlantic, and it's spread across the world, is what keeps the submarine menace down? Aircraft carriers. If you've got escort carriers with you and they're flying, you basically can see the submarine. He knows the aircraft are up and he will dive. To give you an idea, the German submarine that was around Southern Australian World War II lay in the Derwent off Hobart, and she was lining up for a freighter coming down the Derwent when she saw an aircraft through the periscope. And they dived, thinking the aircraft was after them. It wasn't. By the time they came to the surface, the freighter had gone. So history nearly got rewritten in terms of Hobart in World War II. Sir?
Just on that, the German submarine, is that the one that went across to New Zealand
Yep,
and surfaced
that's the one.
at Napier?
Yes.
Yep.
One more?
How loud is it when you're charging the batteries on the surface? Would it make it hard to hear aircraft approaching?
Yes and no. It does make it harder, so you know that things aren't as good as they could be. But you're used to that. And one thing, if you see the pictures of bridge lookouts in World War II on submarines, you've usually got at least 4 and sometimes 6. And they're keeping their eyes on that quadrant they've been given, and they don't take their eyes off it because they know through bitter experience that he will be on top of you and he will kill you. And the aircraft is not flying with navigation lights. He does have searchlights, the Lee light, for example, in the Atlantic, very famous. The Lee light was never used here for some strange reason. I investigated that. Yeah, I don't know why he got surprised like that. I doubt it was incompetence. They were pretty good at their job. And most of the Japanese submarines survived off the east coast, as we can see. One last one. Yep.
Yeah, I know in the northern campaigns, Donuts had instructed his submariners not to dive when they see a plane, but to fight back with their cannon, with their 20mm cannon, whatever. So that was a change because it seemed to be a worse form of defence to dive.
Yeah, I disagree. I'd dive because, look, if you get to 100 feet, you're pretty safe. The nasty thing that aircraft can do is if they've located you, they can vector in warships, and they're even more deadly than aircraft, and he will jump up and down on you for several hours with lots of warships and lots of depth charges. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. I've just got one quick question. You mentioned that at 100 feet you're pretty safe. What depth safely can those submarines get to without injuring the crew?
Oh, well, submarine diving maximum depth in World War II depends on the Navy, but there's submarines that have got down to 900, 1,000 feet. Your danger, of course, is what they call implosion. So the pressure of the water, as you probably understand, if you've been scuba diving or snorkeling or dive to the bottom of your swimming pool, it doubles very, very rapidly. And the pressure of water at 500 feet is enormous. A small leak in a submarine will basically kill it. Now, it is closed up for diving and it is divided into compartments, and one flooded compartment does not mean the end, but it's not helpful. If, of course, you have people depth charging at the same time, it makes it even worse. So it's a very complicated question, but I think if you've ever go and see the movie Das Boot. Don't see the TV series. The movie gives a good idea of how awful it was to be in submarines in World War II. Not nice at all.
Thanks very much, Tom. Really appreciate your presentation.
Thanks a lot.
And we look forward to yours this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you.